Hello, everyone. Hello, Professor Guevara. First of all, thank you for disponibility and for your presentation. My name is Briana. Today I'm here with Jonas and Peter, and we are going to present your paper, Financialization of Land in Peripheral Countries. First of all, we are going to do a brief summary of the main points and remarks that we thought would make sense to the following topic, that is our extensions. And further, we are making you some questions and open the floor for discussion. So first of all, when we talk about financialization in peripheral countries, I think a really good point about your paper is how you connect the fact that the financialization in peripheral countries is directly connected and shaped by the role of these peripheral countries in the global value chains. So exporting commodities, importing technology, as mentioned, financialization is about diversifying risks. So rural land has increasingly become part of these financial portfolios. Forest areas that were used for food production are transforming into non-productive financial assets. And land speculation is driven by expected short-term land use changes, is strongly affecting land prices, both in rural areas and urban areas as well. And large-scale deforestation that is connected directly with cropland expansion, when combined with these anticipated infrastructure products, they create short-term gains for these financial actors, increasing the situation of financialization in peripheral countries.
Okay, the authors also highlight this concept of agrarian structures, which refers to the distribution of land and its usages within an economy. They note how enduring inequalities from the colonial past of many periphery nations, combined with the fact there is in the modern era been a lack or scarce application of land reform, has led to severe inequalities that we still see, and this then results in the agrarian structure taking on a bimodal form. And so this basically means there's like two nodes of concentration, one highly concentrated node of land that is only concentrated around a few amount of actors, but these actors end up underutilizing the land that they have control over, whereas the other node of this is the rest of the land that is distributed amongst the rest of the population and ends up being overutilized. And so this leads to regressive social and economic consequences that then are characterized as an inertia of underdevelopment as a form of accumulation. And this overall reinforces macroeconomic vulnerabilities and dependence on agricultural and extractive export cycles. So the authors then go on to describe financialization's ways that it disciplines agrarian structures, and so in this sense, disciplining refers to the act of imposing control and order over agrarian structures, enabling the extraction of rents in the context of heightened rural and social conflicts. So they highlight three types, the first of which being agribusiness, which is referring to the production, processing, and commercialization of agricultural products. It's associated with many negative social and ecological impacts, as it treats land and food not as components inherent to biophysical reproductive functions of society and nature, but purely as assets that can generate financial gains. So this has led to numerous land conflicts caused by agribusiness, especially in periphery countries. And consequently, their expansive modes of operation and financially motivated exploitation reinforce regressive agrarian structures, threatening domestic food sovereignty, as well as overall social welfare.
So a further form of control is land grabbing, as has been presented in the presentation. So there are three forms of, three functions of land grabbing. First of all, it's a way to exert power and control over land. It also functions to acquisition land or investments by transnational companies, and very importantly, it's a way for capital to mitigate risks, as has become very prevalent after the 2008 financial crisis, after which it also has more and more become the case that financial institutions have used this tool of land grabbing in the financialization of land. And further, it's also a central tool to control regressive agrarian structures, because very often in these areas, state institutions and so on are also quite weak. So you don't only acquisition the land, but also the infrastructure that is tied to it, such as roads and so on. And then there's a third form of control that the authors mentioned. It's the financialization of nature, which has been there for a long time. Historically, it is rather connected to non-renewable resources such as fossil fuels and mining, which have been financed by financial institutions. Today, this also includes the commodification of forests and jungles, as well as this capitalization of on biodiversity and CO2 sinks. And what is quite interesting there, that it's no longer just about the ownership and the direct ownership of the land, but it can be much more indirect through the certification, as I will show a bit more in detail in a second. And what is quite central is that it reproduces the status quo of, first of all, of this extractive mode of production, and also that you have this expansion towards new forms of financialization. Now, we really like the paper, so our critique is not large, so we mostly will focus on some extensions to the paper that we find interesting. I will start with the RED Plus framework. That is a quite good example, in my opinion, of the financialization of nature. RED Plus is a framework under the UNFCCC that has been kind of finalized in 2013 in Warsaw, and it stands for Reducing Emissions from Deforestation and Forest Degradation in Developing Countries. And what you see under there is that, especially when the financing comes from private sources, that you have a form of green assetization and green securitization under it. So like this kind of creation of carbon markets, which should then theoretically finance anti-deforestation projects in developing countries. But the critique is that this leads to a commodification and appropriation of indigenous labor and knowledge, and especially not just of current labor, but of all previous generations, because indigenous people are quite central to the preservation of biodiversity and also forests and jungles in this world. And it has also been shown that this has quite led to questionable emission reductions, as I will also quickly mention afterwards, that a lot of these projects are actually not delivering what they're promising. So then in this case, it kind of reinforces and also expands this market-driven neoliberal view on climate mitigation, and also kind of reinforces actually a fossil capitalism, where the story is that mostly markets and so on are able to deliver climate mitigation instead of like clear regulations. So yeah, and there has been quite some turmoil in the past 2 years when it comes on the carbon market. That the Guardian, together with researchers, has shown 2 years ago that most carbon offset credits are basically useless, that they don't lead to any reductions. Then this investigation has led to a dramatic drop in prices of carbon offsets projects, which then again led to the fact that a lot of projects that are actually delivering certain types of like anti-deforestation projects, they are faced with draining financial sources. So yeah, it's quite dramatic, and it's definitely not a sustainable mode on how to preserve our forests and jungles.
All right, now I would like to talk on a conceptual level of this concept that the authors mentioned on this inertia of underdevelopment as a form of accumulation, and how this characterizes agrarian structures in the periphery. And this really reminded me of a paper by Stephen Bunker from 1984, which I really liked. And it's on modes of extraction, unequal exchange, and what he terms progressive underdevelopment in the extreme periphery. And so this is a case study that takes a historical view of the Brazilian Amazon. And his central thesis here is that essentially development or underdevelopment is a result of how dominant local classes reorganize their modes of production or modes of extraction in response to exchange opportunities and political actions in the greater world system. And so this focus on the Brazilian Amazon is a very nice case because the Amazon itself is kind of a periphery of the periphery. It's really on the frontiers of extraction when you're thinking about extraction and productive modes. And so he periodizes the periphery of the Amazon. And so starting in the pre-colonial period, you have a region that has dense indigenous populations, but they're still able to live off the land in a very sustainable way that is in balance with the natural regenerative cycles of the environment. However, this then gets disrupted with the introduction of colonialism from the Portuguese from the 16th to 19th centuries. And during this period, through demands from international trade and their international material trade, they engage in highly exploitative extraction of materials that are endemic to the region, that both overexploit the indigenous populations, causing massive destruction to their numbers, but also severely depletes natural resources in the Amazon. And so this mode of extraction is highly unsustainable in the long run, but it was never meant to be sustainable. It was only meant to further drive the production of value and extract that and send that across the seas. And so then this ultimately starts slowing down as resources get extended too far, and indigenous populations that are put into that are forced to work these lands slowly are also depleted. And with the decline of this industry, we then also see this next period, which is the rubber boom, where with the advent of industrialization through automobiles and also the rise of bicycles, there's a high demand for rubber, which at the time was also was monopolistically, or like there was a natural monopoly of its production in Brazil. And in order to, partake in this very labor-intensive industry, despite this labor-intensive industry, there wasn't any natural necessary labor because the indigenous populations were decimated essentially, and so you had a migration or importation of labor from other regions into this area. And these laborers were also put in highly dependent and exploitative relationships because they were put into debt, and the landowners and the main business owners of the rubber industry were concentrating their profits in highly dependent and extractive unequal relationships. But then this also came to an end once rubber started being produced in other regions of the world, and Brazil lost its monopoly on that. And so then this also leads to an impoverishment of the area, because over time there still has never really been any solid base of production or provisioning of the basic needs that are needed in order to develop the region, so to say. And so this last period we see that Bunker characterizes is in the modern times, in the post-war era, and with looking at this region as being highly underinvested in, overexploited, and having this progressive underdevelopment, essentially governments and global capital see this region and characterize it as, this empty frontier that can only benefit them through just commodifying it and selling off the land for different uses and converting it into different uses, whether that be mining or farming or other forestry, other land use change type industries. And so going, thank you, into the modern times, kind of transferring off of this, the Bunker piece ended in 1980, but this other piece by Katsikis also examines Brazil, not necessarily in the Amazon, more in the southern central region, but it's still relevant, and it goes from 1980 to the current times and describes this continuation of underdevelopment and extractiveness through global value chains in the food industry, specifically what they call the global industrial feedlot matrix. So basically over time, in a continuation of the last period that Bunker mentions, through neoliberal reforms and greater reorganizations of the peripheries, we see essentially this region of Brazil here become the largest soy producing region in the world, and it becomes a key part of the global value chain of a growing demand on livestock and meat production, for a growing global population. And so with this kind of historical view, it's a very nice way to see and contextualize these like aspects of financial disciplining and financialization that we see in current times by looking through the historical lead up to what leads to this sorts of underdevelopment and over-exploitation.
Okay, and finally, I would like to share with you this report from FAO that was released last year that I think it brings a really broad aspect of how financialization of land is changing the configuration of agriculture in the past 22 years. So this report called A State of Food and Agriculture from 2025 basically analyzes the changes in agriculture area from 2001 to 2023. In general, the first part of the report focused on how this global agriculture area decreased by something like 2%, but at the same time we have an increase in the cropland area by 78 million hectares. And when we focus about the distribution of farms global wide, we have that the large farms that are bigger than 50 hectares, for example, they are the ones that dominate the global production of the crops, cereal pulses, sugars, and oil crops. And this is relative to 55% of the total global crop-derived nutrients. And when we focus specifically on what it calls the mega farms or the largest farms that are bigger than 1,000 hectares, it accounts for nearly 1/60 of the global food energy from crops. So here we see a huge focus on these really small players that are owners of this huge amount of lands, and they're the ones producing the crop. When we connect this agriculture expansion to deforestation, for example, the figures show us that globally in the same period of time, 2001 to 2023, we have a forest area decline by 109 million hectares. And this is connected directly with the cropland expansion. When we focus only in Latin America and the Caribbean, for example, in this period of 20 years, we have an expansion of 25 million hectares of cropland that are linked directly to deforestation of 85 million hectares. And the paper reinforces that the primary driver of this global deforestation is the cropland development. And literally 90% of the global deforestation is driven by agriculture. And being cropland the one with the single largest contributor, with almost half of the total deforestation area. And finally, one interesting figure that also the report brings us is this distribution of farms. So when we talk about financialization, we know that we have this expansion of the size of the farms, but FAO brings us in a different way. Normally, when we're talking about the farm size, we have the mean. But they are comparing here, the mean is the green one, the median the orange one, to understand that this median would be the typical farm that is going to be faced in the middle of the distribution. And when we compare the mean to the median, we could see what they argue here, that is an implicit indicator of farm size inequality. So here we have low-income countries, low-middle-income countries, upper-middle-income countries, high-income countries, and globally. And you see that the biggest difference between mean and median is located in upper-middle countries. They're here in Latin America would be Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, Colombia. And high-income countries with a high concentration of this difference in the United States. So in the last 20 years, the mean farm sizes have contributed to an increase in the most of Latin America, the Caribbean, Europe, and Central Asia. But when we compare all the countries, the 131 countries that were part of the distribution, the mean farm sizes are 2 to 7 times greater than the median farm sizes across all income groups. And what this can tell us, that when mainly in the South America, Latin American countries that are considered upper middle income countries, and in high income countries, we have a huge inequality. So we have, again, another number that explains us that we have a really small number of global players that are controlling and acquiring huge amounts of extensions of land and producing the crops. Finally, consider all that we presented. We have some questions. I will start. To what extent do you believe that the trajectory of land financialization in South America would have differed if comprehensive agrarian reforms had been implemented, alongside the consolidation of institutions governing the agrarian sector?
So my question is, as carbon markets and the financialization of nature fail to deliver a long-term stable safeguard against deforestation, what is your proposal how deforestation can be tackled effectively?
And my question is, did your research cover historical developments of land financialization in any specific cases? And if so, were there any insights into how disruptions like global shocks or monetary regime changes affect the quasi-money treatment of land as you identify in the paper? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So, Diego, the floor is yours. If you
No. Thank you very much for this presentation. Actually, I think that probably, as you have the paper fresh, probably was better than than mine, and I really like your presentation with the main points. Of course, I have some kind of bias toward financialization literature, but okay, let's go again. Thank you very much for reading the paper and try to take the good insights. Okay, regarding the first question, I mean, I think that probably in South America, if we had had comprehensive agrarian reforms, probably uh, a better, let's say, better institutions govern the agrarian sector. Probably, I mean, probably there could be financialization, but probably they need more lobby in the parliament. They need to create more different laws. I mean, I think that even if we have had an agrarian reform, probably the level of land inequality will be different. I'm not sure about that, but I'm not pretty sure if the trajectory of land financialization will be different. Probably a different structure can slower the pace of financialization because you need new laws, you need more institutional arrangement. For example, in the case of the pension funds. In the case of the pension funds, there is a lot of institutional governance around that, a lot of control. And actually, before 2015, the pension funds there were not allowed to invest in ETF, exchange tradable funds, or derivative. And then they did a lot of lobbying in the government and in the parliament to allow to the pension fund to invest abroad in complex derivative. So basically, probably the same had happened with the land. Probably if there were a different agrarian structure, probably could be a little bit slow. Probably they need more lobby in the parliament. Uh, Probably will be the main difference. Because now, for example, for land financialization in Colombia, you don't need to create some specific big law or big lobby in the parliament because it's easy because there is a lot of informality as we said in the paper. So, but it's an I question. Uh, ooh, I think that the point regarding the deforestation it's really important. Actually, what we tried to do in the government was to create an important program like to pay the families who are in the border with the Amazonian and try to create kind of green jobs, you know. I don't know if you are connected with this literature of employer of last resort and green employees. And basically it's just a cash transfer to the people who live in these areas and try to commit these people to keep the 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 forest with public spending, um, with public spending. Basically, is what we were trying to do. But in the other hand, and for the case of Colombia, an important part of the problem with deforestation is not the cattle. I mean, in a lot of countries, because you start to create deforestation for um, for farming or for cattle. But in the case of Colombia, it's pretty much related with with coca plant, with cocaine, with drug traffic. So also you need security. So it's a combination of different factors in the proposal. But we try to tackle that, but it's complex. Um, I think that the carbon markets and the and the financialization of nature completely fails, and basically what creates it for some specific communities, some kind of dependence of some specific contracts. They receive some money, really little money of the money that you can move in the financial market, where you just try to justify that you are trying to take care of the nature. But I mean, I'm actually, we tried to sell as Colombian government some green bonds, and still is really, I mean, let's say it's less than 1% of all the bonds that the Colombian government sell in terms of the green bonds. And actually, when you try to sell a green bond as a country, you need a specific taxonomy for that. So definitely, I'm not optimistic that the financial markets are to solve that problem. So probably you need these measures. And finally, I think that, I mean, and probably it's a good idea to try to go to a specific case. The problem with that is the data. Um, when you don't have an important track and informant the database for the countries, because there is not clarity regarding ownership. Uh, so basically, I think that is not easy. It's not easy in terms of the land ownership, in terms of the different financial investors. If we want to an historical development, probably it's something important, but I think that this is a whole dissertation. I think that if you want to do a specific case for that, you need data. When actually when 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 we start to try to approach to this topic, try to find data for Colombia, data, we went to different institutions, and probably and we never find that. So probably it was the idea that this paper is a little bit more theoretical approach. Probably it's something that we can try to use as a framework for future studies, but there are not enough data. So basically we didn't, I mean, we tried to see some data, but the objective of the paper were more related in terms of how variegated financialization or subordinated financialization can be analyzed to the life of land in the in the country. And definitely yes, probably the only idea that we have around the global shock is after the 2008 crisis in the United States. Probably the portfolios of Wall Street are a little bit different. I mean, still they have derivative, but they also have to start to invest in land production and in other kinds of uh, real sector, trying to create and trying to create new assets with the control of these assets of the land. So probably those will be my answers here.
Some questions from the rest of the students. We have plenty of questions. It's nice. Let's start here and then.
Hello, Professor. My name is Luca from Brazil. First of all, thank you so much for the presentation. I kind of had a whole question prepared for the voluntary carbon credit market, but thank you, Jonas. Yeah, I then shift to my second question that I feel like here in academia, it's very easy to discuss heterodox/structuralist ideas and how to implement them, obviously, right? But we see when it shifts towards policymaking that there's a lot of pressures. I'm talking specifically about Gabriel Galípolo, the current president of the Brazilian Central Bank, because we see how you can see he suffers a lot of pressure from capital, but also from heterodox academia on itself. And I would maybe ask from you, do you have any tips for us that are completely, no, I don't want to say naive, but we don't have much experience outside of academia, right, in a policymaking framework. So how do you have any tips for us to how to bridge this gap between our theories and how to apply this, maybe?
No, Luca, no, thank you. Thank you very much for this question. Actually,
Can we get Can we get 2 more questions and then
Yeah,
we do
yeah.
one
Go
more?
ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Hi, Diego. I'm Silvana from Colombia. You argue in the paper that the Wall Street consensus is reshaping dependency relations through green finance and land assetization. But in Colombia's specific scenario, do you think that those climate policies and carbon markets could end up reinforcing land concentration and financial control rather than promoting territorial justice and environmental protection? Thank you.
Mhm.
Hola, Diego. My name is Daniela from Colombia as well. I'm going to shift a bit away from the land part of your topic and more ask you about something that you mentioned that is a question that I've had for quite some time, and it's relating to the credit for nature for fuck, I forgot the name. Dead nature swaps. Thank you. And I wanted to ask you because Colombia was negotiating one, and this government under Susana Muhammad decided to refuse the swap. And there are several reasons, but I would like to ask you about your own point of view, and maybe from a financialization point of view, if you have any, like, if you could help me understand what are the reasons for maybe this would have been the government in which this would have been a very interesting pathway. So that is my question for you.
Okay, Diego, we can go on, and then we collect other questions later, please.
And okay, Bruno, thank you very much. Okay, let's start with the question of Luca. Actually, I'm trying to finish a really first paper, try to see which are the main obstacles when you are coming from heterodox formation, when you have been criticizing many things, and then you need to govern, and there is an important distance between the academia and the real life. Actually today with my colleagues in the university, I have a lot of discussions because many of them, no, Diego, when you were in the government, you were a neoliberal. And it's like, come on, when you are in the government, you have laws, you have a lot of things that restrain that's what you want to do. And probably, I don't know if it's a tip or not, but something I think that is really important that we need to be aware are the legal constraints. When we study economics, nobody says to us that, hey man, probably you have a really nice idea, but take a look which are the specific rules of your country and the laws of the country. And the financialization also has create laws. There is this nice book from, I forget the name, The Code of Capital, the Susanna Pastori. Well, I forget the name of the girl now, but this this book of the Code of the Capital, it's something that we really need to know how the different laws and different lawyers have created a whole, let's say, a complex arrangement of laws that basically it's just helping the financial capital. And if you don't follow these rules immediately, you are going to have problem with the justice. Basically, in Colombia, we have a fiscal rule that it's a law of the Republican. I don't like the fiscal rule, but when you are applying, when you are governing with these rules, you need to change that, yeah. But you want to change that, also you need the parliament. So I think that you have restrictions, and probably for heterodox economics, when you go to real life, you have restrictions in terms of laws, restrictions in terms of political restriction, and the pressure of financial capital. Uh, and probably this is the reason why you have to be a little bit pragmatic if you want to try to do some kind of heterodox things. In terms of macroeconomics, it's really hard. But for example, in the finance minister, we were able to es- to to push that some people start to use a stock flow consistent model that we were developing with Antoine Godin. And for sure, you have had some lesson with him. Antoine was working with me like from 2017 until before I went to the government. And when I went to the government, I have the opportunity to keep working with AFD and trying to put this model there. And of course, all the people there still is using the DSG model, but some people start to use, actually this year, they use the stock flow for 3 or 4 simulation that it's a small step, but it's important. But also it's allowed to you and your government to have a different approaches to informality. We start to talk about popular economy. I mean, I think that there are some spaces where you can do things, but in terms of the macro world, it's really hard. And probably you have to play with the rules of the Wall Street, because if you try to say, I want to renegotiate the debt, if immediately if you say that, the interest rate of your bonds increase. Actually, one of my main discussions with the president was that is, now Diego, but you want a small budget. You are a neoliberal, president. If we don't have prudent budgets, because for us in macroeconomics, public expenditure. But in the real life, one thing is the budget and one thing is the cash flow. And if you don't have the cash flow, what is the real public expenditure? And if you are not able to collect all this money with taxes, you need more debt. And if you are trying to push with the Wall Street guys, the interest rate is higher. And it's what is happening to Colombia actually. Now our interest rate the last week is higher than the Argentinian, and it's probably my main discussion with the president and what I left the position, because what is the real neoliberalism? Is the financialized capitalism, and you cannot keep having expensive debt, just try to do social programs. So this is an important discussion that we can have, but it's something that you face this restriction of financial capital, and it's not, and you can criticize that, but when you are playing in this role, you need to understand your restriction, and you need to play, let's say, like a veggie leftist. I don't know. Usually, when I went to Wall Street, I told to the people that in South America we have to kind of leftist the the vegetarian and the carnivorous. And if you are carnivorous as Venezuela or a little bit Argentina, immediately Wall Street kill you. So you have to play a little bit more like Pepe Mujica or a little bit more like Boric. Try to do some progressive policies, but try to play soft with the financial capital. And I think that in terms of a pragmatic approach is what you can do. I mean, you can try to support public education, try to do some progressive approach. Um, but the fight against global financial capital is just the fight against a new financial architecture. And I think that probably is the dream of our generation. We need to work for a new global financial architecture. Otherwise, from a little country from Colombia, I want to fight against Wall Street. Okay, tomorrow, actually, when Petro's president at the beginning of the year had a fight with Trump, and I was finance minister at that moment, they said, okay, Colombia is going to be part of the countries with sanctions for terrorism. And immediately all the banks from the States start to block the Colombian banks. And what you're going to do with your exporters is not that I'm going now to move to Europe. No, even if you are in Europe, you need to go through Wall Street. So it's like atomic bomb. So you need to be strategic with that. Let me see the other two questions. Okay, regarding the last question, the credit for nature. Basically, the main thing with the swaps and with these specific financial products, the original idea of Petro in terms of the political approach is how I can create some kind of debt relief, debt for climate, debt for nature. And debt for nature, it's something really romantic. It was what Rafael Correa tried to do in Ecuador, that, okay, I'm not going to explore more oil and gas, but I need that you buy my bonds. And he was not able to sell any bonds, so he decided to explore oil and gas in Yaku, in the Amazonic jungle, in the Yacuni, I forget the name now. Um, and here, when Petro said that, immediately all the financial actors start to come to the office. People from Rothschild Co., people from Goldman Sachs. No, we have the product, and they can create this kind of a specific swap, but they charge a commission. It's not for free. Basically, the business behind all this structuration of derivative products is the commission of the financial institution that create the product, and also another institution that put the bond in the financial market. And all this is commission after commission. So probably when we were discussing this with Susana, this debt for nature swap, we were analyzing the case of Ecuador. Actually, the case of Ecuador, that is a really romantic debt for nature swap in the Galapagos. It was an SLB, a sustainable linked bond, and and you can create a really nice narrative around that. But when you start to see, Credit Suisse was the one who structured this SLB for Galapagos, and and the level of the commission is really high. It's not a good business, and it was something that they were trying to do here. So after some cases, for us, it's not very much different to get some credit from. Probably now it makes sense because now the Colombian interest rate in this year grows from 8 to 13, and probably now it makes sense to get a better interest rate. But probably when Susana was in the minister, it doesn't make any sense. It's different for Ecuador that the interest rate is higher in the international market. So probably it was the reason as far as I know. But for me, the main conclusion, actually, my PhD advisor, Marco Misaglia, one day he told me, Diego, the neoliberalism is like a rubber. You throw something and immediately it grabs the things. When the poor people ask for money in the 90s to the neoliberalism, they create the cash transfers. When when you have problems with climate change, you create debt for nature swaps. So it's super flexible, and they can create whatever you can imagine to keep the financial system in the game. Actually, here we start to talk about popular economy, and immediately the banking sector start to talk about credit for popular economy, and it's easy for them to adapt to the new scenarios. And the other question of Lina was regarding, can you remember? It was Lina, right? I don't remember. Was Daniela, Luca? Can you remember the guy? Sorry, I thought that I didn't. Was reshaping.
No, I asked you that when you talk about the Wall Street consensus in
Ah,
reshaping the dependency relations through green finance and land assetization, that what do you think in the specific case of Colombia? Because I think that these climate policies and carbon markets could end up reinforcing the land concentration that we already face, rather than promoting territorial justice.
yeah, I mean, I think that in terms of the theoretical approach, the idea of the Wall Street consensus, probably for the case of Colombia, I think that is reshaping the relationship of the three main groups of Colombia that for sure for you are familiar, that are Adapal group, that are the group Antioqueño, all those actors now they reshape the relationships with global financial system, but at the same time they are one of the main buyers of land. Grupo Aval today is one of the main buyers of land, but at the same time is one of the main financial groups in Colombia, also even in Central America, and they are connected with the global financial system, but also with the public finance. From this point of view, probably there is some connection of the Wall Street to this logic of Wall Street consensus, how the local elites move from industrial elites to financial elite. But I'm not sure to the if we can think that in a country like Colombia, climate policies or some specific dimension for carbon markets or conservation is connected to this idea of the Wall Street consensus. To be honest, for the case of Colombia, I think that it's really weak, the relationship. I'm not sure if I understood you well, your question, but those are the links that I can see here.
Of two questions.
I need to finish probably like 10 minutes, something like this, or probably we can have these last three questions. It's okay. Or if you have more, try to.
Okay. My name is Diego. I'm from Switzerland. Yeah, I want to ask you a conceptual question about financialization and how you can distinguish what is land concept, basically the agribusiness, from finance itself. Because I looked from another class at Brazil Agro, which belongs to Crescent. It's apparently the biggest agribusiness company in Latin America, and they openly say their strategy is buying land, increasing their value and selling it. So how can you even distinguish this from an outright finance business? And if I may, a short second question about the land reform. You maybe already mentioned it, but you said, oh, there's these social movements and there's a huge inequality. Why hasn't it happened? Is it more the external constraints, so that that there's pressure from the outside, or do you think it's also the internal constraints, maybe from a view from within?
Yeah, hello, I'm Florian from Germany. I'm having a conceptual question. So, like, treating land as quasi-money to me is confusing because the land itself doesn't hold a transaction motive or, like, doesn't serve a transaction motive. Of course, you get, like, if you have an agricultural produce by owning the land, then you can sell this, but you can't sell the land itself to settle the payment. And no one wants to get paid in land instead of dollars. And like with your logic, you could just like define anything that generates a stream of income as quasi-money, even if it's not a liquid asset.
And then we have a last one here.
I'll go straight to the point. First, thank you. And I'm Thiago from Brazil. And I really like your answer that you gave to Luca, actually, and especially the point that you said, okay, the financial markets, they're really good at adapting and creating new forms of financializing whatever policies that are made. And what do you think that is missing from a government side, from a policymaker side, to adapt to these new adaptations from the finance industry? And in a matter of how can we combat this and adapt into these consequences?
Great. Any final urgent, very, very relevant and urgent question? One from Argentina. We need one from Argentina.
Hi, I'm Alina from Argentina. No, it's going to be a little bit out of scope, so sorry for that. But I want to ask you if you think after what happened in Venezuela, the situation of dependency and the threat in Colombia is like worse, or we are just like in the same area of US doing whatever they want with our countries, just in a different violent language.
Great. So Diego, the floor is yours. We need a whole day to respond to those questions.
Yeah, it's not easy, but let's start from the last questions from Argentina. Oh, I think that Trump is pledging to, and actually he said that. He said, America is the Western hemisphere is my hemisphere, and I want to do whatever I want. And basically, you can see with the bond that saved elections in Argentina 2 months ago, that probably is the first time that a financial bank start to buy Argentinian pesos, and they lent, I don't remember, something like $22 billion, some crazy, but this is a specific injerencia, I forget the word in English, how you start to enter in the local economy of a country, like it happened in Argentina, what just happened in Venezuela, and the president called with Trump the last week. I think that is basically okay. We need to understand that there is some kind of dependency from you, and we cannot play with you. Actually, I didn't know this expression that now is really famous in English, like it's FAFO, like fine around and fuck off. I didn't know that expression until recently with Trump, that you want to play with me. I'm talking for real. And I think that Petro's president, the main reason why Gustavo Petro is trying to find some is not just because of the country, it's because 4 months ago, the US Department put the president in the Clinton list, or the OFAC list, that is the list with are the terrorists, and you cannot have any relationship with the president, with the persons, with the people that are in this list. Right now, there is some stupid story, but now, for example, Petro, we cannot pay him in the bank, because otherwise the bank is also sanctioned. We need to pay him in a check, like in the old times, in the treasury. So Petro also is trying to find that they put him out from this list, and also recognize that you need to play with the guy. So basically, it's a new stage of dependency. And it's really complex. And if you try to be rebel, you see what happened in terms of the military approach, but also in terms of financial approach. If you have an economic blockage from the United States, probably you have an important drama. Part of the drama in Venezuela is not when Chavez, is not when Maduro arrived, it's probably after 2017, when you have the United States blockage. When you need to export your products and you don't have a financial channel to receive the money, you are dead. And the only channel is through New York in Wall Street. It's not that now I want to do business. Probably Russia and China, they can do that in their own currencies, and they're trying to. And Bruno for sure has talked more about that, but is that point. Coming back to the other to the other question, what we can do from the policymaker to try to adapt. I think that is not enough to gain the presidential election, you need to create a really important force in the parliament and try to negotiate a couple of things with financial capital, try to negotiate some kind of productive investment. I think that this is possible, but still you need to negotiate. Otherwise, the sanctions and and the pain from financial actors is complicated. But I think that you need more political. It's not just about policymaker. Also, you need a strong political force in the parliament. Otherwise, is really hard to keep updated with that. But also, you need people with experience in the people who knows how the real words uh, uh, work. For example, we start to do a tax reform with Ocampo, and we start to find for lawyers, experts in taxes from the left. And no, we have a lot of lawyers in human rights, in different things in the left, but we don't have lawyers, experts in taxes, for example. So these kind of things are things that are practical things that as lefty people we need to have. Okay, regarding today, I think that I agree. I forget her name, but actually with my co-authors when we were discussing this idea of the three Keynes motive, yeah, it's easy to say that it's speculative of precautionary. This is really easy, but of course when we talk about the transactional role, is the idea of liquidity behind, and of course the land is not liquid. But probably when we were discussing that paper, still we had this idea of the food crisis, the food sovereignty, and we were thinking that you need the land to produce most of the exchangeable food in the world. So probably this is a weak link, and I completely agree with your critic, but probably with this weak link, um, we can try to have a really nice framework to analyze, because definitely as a speculative and precautionary, I think that there are not pretty much discussion in terms of transaction is a little bit more complex, but you need land to produce a lot of food and different goods that you can exchange, and that definitely also are more liquid than land. But it's a good critic. And just to finish the last question, which was the last question? I forget. I didn't. Sorry. Um, da, 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 da. Yeah, you were the last question.
My question was about distinguishing a financialized agribusiness from just the outright finance business.
Oh,
There
yeah.
are land reforms if you have that time for this as well.
You are right. Thank you. No, usually, probably, I think that everything today in our lives is financialized. Uh, Higher education, a lot of private higher education in the world, a lot of different things. But to be more specific, the agrobusiness itself turns financialized when the shares of these companies enter to the uh, financial market in forms of in two ways, in terms of the products and the derivative from the products that it exists a lot of time ago. You have option and futures in terms of production of potatoes, of a lot of different things. I think that that is a more classic way of financialization uh, of the food. But also when you have in the chain the agrobusiness, just not the production, also the land as an asset, uh, it's create another dimension for financial capital. One thing is that, for example, you have food production, but you buy the food in one country and you sell in another one, and still you are connected with the financial system. But when you start to connect the financial system to the whole change, include the land tenure, uh, probably this is the way as is connected with financialization. So one thing is one agrobusiness that is not connected with finance, but other is when you have the whole chain. Is as I understand. I don't know if I respond you a little bit your question. Of course, today now, when you are in Wall Street in a portfolio, everything is finance. Actually there is a really nice quote from Keynes, and I want to finish with that. And what he said is 100 years ago, he said, usually the capitalism from the 19th century, they were engaged with their business, with their enterprise as a marriage, long term, and they are really engaged with which is my my factory, who are my workers, what I am producing, a lot of passion for what, and it was the capitalism from the industrial times. But then can say, but now in the 20s, in the roaring 20s, 1 century ago, can say, but now we have a capitalism, some capitalists that they are not interested in long-term relationships. They are more interested in short-term, and they don't care if they have food or banks or trees or university. They don't care. They just want to see a number in the portfolio to create rents. So I think that when you start to understand that the agribusiness is just part a portfolio, immediately for the financial market is just another sector where you can take rents and immediately merge with financial system. So probably it's something that gives you a little bit more of ideas. Oh, to be honest, it was really nice session. I am starting today my year, my academic year here in Colombia. We are just coming back from the December holidays, so it was a really nice session to start the year here. Still, we have the morning, so thank you very much for your time, and Bruno, thank you very much for having me there.
Thank you, Diego. It was really amazing. And we hope to have you here in person next year or for the POG seminar. Let's meet in person.
Yeah, hopefully I want to go. I want to go in person to present probably the paper of the government experience that probably is a little more. Okay. Bye guys. Thank you very much.
Nice afternoon. Bye bye.